teenage brains being a bit like my 1962 VW Beetle that I had as a student that's all revving engine and dodgy brakes and gears. So I'll kind of use sort of humour to explain why kind of teenage brains aren't kind of wired yet. They're still kind of closed for renovations. And so that helps parents to kind of feel a little bit more understanding maybe of their kind of teenagers' angst, that, okay, their brains are still under construction. We have to be a little bit realistic. They're not kind of miniature adults. They're actually a work in progress.
I am so excited to welcome my next guest to the show, the beautiful, funny Dr. Jo Prendergast. And she's here today and she's going to take us on a journey of raising teens. Her comedy shows that are scheduled next week here at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, and we're going to do a little bit of unpacking and unbunking of being a parent, raising teens in 2024, and everything in between.
Yes, no, definitely excited to talk about all those topics.
I know. Well, welcome to Melbourne.
Thank you.
Are you excited about the Melbourne comedy?
Yeah, well, I did my first line-up gig last night, so I'm doing line-up gigs this week in preparation for the Cool Mum opening on the 8th, which is Monday. So, yeah, very excited. So, got a nice crowd building for opening night, which is good.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, two hats you juggle. You know, Jo the comedian that goes by Jo Ghastly.
Yeah.
And then Jo Prendergast that is psychiatrist. How did you fuse those two together? Because they're so completely different, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think certainly the kind of comedy sort of strand of my life probably developed since I was born. My dad was a very funny man. He had this deadpan prankster kind of side of him. I can remember when I was probably about 7 or 8, we got into a lift with some American tourists, and my father said to them, "Oh, you know, where are you from?" And they went, "Oh, United States of America." And he went, "I think I've heard of that." And they were going, "Oh my God, Sandy, he hasn't heard," you know. And then my dad goes to me, "Oh, you know, Jo, have you heard of United States of America?" And I went, "Don't think so." And Dad goes, "Oh, I think it's the one near Papua New Guinea." And we had this kind of like, and they were going, "Oh my God, oh my God."
Oh, that's hilarious.
So, you know, that's how my dad operated in life. He was constantly kind of teasing people.
Oh, I love that.
And he was a CEO of a big business, and everybody really looked forward to his kind of business talks, which were basically stand-up comedy. So that's definitely where the comedy side came from. Yeah, and in terms of the kind of medicine, psychiatry, medicine does run in the family a bit. I've got an uncle who's a doctor, and I kind of decided as a teenager to go to medical school, so that was kind of there from pretty early on. And as soon as I got to medical school, I realised that the thing I really valued was chatting to people and finding out their stories, and much more than kind of chopping people up as a surgeon or listening to sputum in their chests as a kind of physician. So very quickly I kind of went into psychiatry as a junior doctor. And so that's probably been one of my biggest challenges of how do I have kind of serious psychiatrist Dr. Jo Prendergast and kind of silly fun comedian Jo Ghastly as the same person, and that's essentially how it kind of started with having the two names. So that way it's kind of like whatever Jo Ghastly says on stage is not necessarily what Dr. Jo Prendergast, psychiatrist,
which is a good thing, I think, as well, because you know what, I mean, life throws all sorts of curveballs, and you know, and if you can kind of see the funny side of things occasionally, and you know, I feel like it may make it, and this is only my perspective, of course, it may make it those challenging moments a little bit easier to kind of navigate.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, especially as a parent too.
Yeah. Well, I think with parenting, if you don't laugh, you cry. You know,
and I've done both. Those things. Probably cried more than laughed.
Slamming the doors and yelling, or drinking your body weight in Chardonnay. You know, it is. It's definitely been my toughest gig, being a parent, particularly a parent of teenagers. You know, way more challenging than being a psychiatrist, I think, to be a parent.
I'm glad you said that. That makes me feel so much better.
Yeah,
because you often, as a parent, you question. You think, have I dealt with this properly? Have I not dealt with it? Am I missing something? Was I too strong? Did I yell too much? Maybe I shouldn't yell. You're constantly self-doubting.
Absolutely.
Constantly, what's normal, what's not normal. You infuse it as part of your show, The Cool Mum, I believe, right?
Yeah, well, what I've done in The Cool Mum, I mean, it essentially developed as a bit of a coping mechanism for coping with parenting teenagers myself. So when I first started comedy in 2017, my daughter was 16 and my son was 13. So it was kind of peak parenting teenager territory. My daughter kind of spoke with eye rolls and my son just grunted, basically. And so the comedy very much was the kind of truth of what I was going through kind of day by day as a parent. And then when COVID lockdown happened, and a friend was opening a theatre called Little Andromeda in Christchurch, was kind of asking for shows, I went, I'm going to do a one-woman show called The Cool Mum. And lockdown was actually quite useful because I had kind of a couple of months where I could just sit down and put the whole show together. And at that point I thought, I'm going to put some take-home messages in there that are comedic but are based on probably like the top 3 things that helped me get through as a parent in terms of the key messages. So the messages are in there, but kind of a joke lands on them pretty quickly. Like an example is, you don't need to be a perfect parent, you just need to be good enough. And then I say, a bit like a pilot.
Oh, no.
You don't need to be the best, you can always work for, insert the airline that is kind of least respected in the place you're at. But yeah, that only needing to be good enough was something that really helped me as a parent, because when it was all unravelling I was going, it's okay, kind of kids learn through the rupture and repair of their relationship with their parents. This is actually kind of something that's going to strengthen my children's resilience. I don't need to be perfect. Being perfect is actually a problem because it sets kids up for having unrealistic expectations. If kind of mum does everything for them and then there's suddenly, grumpy Mrs. Davidson in maths class who's kind of telling them off, or kind of, it means that they've got, that experience that there's people who care for them that lose the plot sometimes and are imperfect, and that's just the way life is.
So true. I often say that to my kids, and when things don't go the way we want, or mum's in a bad mood, or I've had a long day at work, and I'm like, I think it's healthy for them to see the flip side. That
Absolutely.
Things are great, but sometimes things aren't that great, and and mum needs a break, or dad needs a break, or whoever's looking after them.
Yeah.
And I think it also builds that awareness.
Yeah.
And that empathy of, maybe I'll just make my own food tonight.
Yeah, exactly. And I call that kind of benign neglect. It's a term that I kind of dreamed up myself kind of in my parenting. So it was a little bit trying to make a sort of official term of what I saw as my parenting failures. But then I went, actually, maybe it's a strength because it's the opposite of being a helicopter parent.
I'm guilty of being a helicopter parent, and not that I mean to. I unconsciously do it.
Yeah.
But I can also see your point of view where it's not probably the best way sometimes.
Yeah, and I think the kind of evidence for that is that helicopter parenting seems to be associated with higher rates of anxiety and depression. So, it's kind of like, well, that's exactly what we're trying to prevent as helicopter parents. We don't want our kids to have any distress. We want to solve everything for them so that life's really smooth. Heard somebody talking about it being lawnmower parenting, where you just like kind of mow the lawn in front of them so they have this nice lawn to walk on in life. But it's kind of like, life's kind of a choppy field, kind of if they're only used to walking on a bowling green, kind of what's life going to look. It comes from good intent, because we are wanting to kind of reduce the distress that our kids feel, and we don't want them to have things that they can't cope with. But sometimes we underestimate what they can actually cope with, and sometimes failing an exam is good because it shows them that if I don't get my act together, I don't pass, or missing out on something because they didn't get organised in time. All of those kind of things. Obviously if your kid's got severe ADHD like my kids do, you sometimes have to step in a little bit more because you know that time blindness and organisation are things that aren't strengths. And so sometimes you do need to kind of offer a bit more scaffolding in that direction. But, like with my daughter, for example, I kind of did a lot of helicoptering all through high school in terms of asking for extensions for her for assessments and talking to teachers about various things. And then she went to university and really struggled in the first couple of years when I wasn't there, kind of problem solving. But interestingly, she needed to fail some papers to then go, hey, I think I need an ADHD coach, and I need to work out a strategy, and I need to put my phone on silent when I'm studying, and I need to study at the library, not at my flat, because I start baking muffins and cleaning my room. So she, I think by about third or fourth year at university, really got her act together, and she needed to go through some disappointments and failures and struggles to get to that point.
Which is very common. ADHD is a very common, I guess, in a lot of teenagers. I see it more and more these days, and it is sometimes tricky to navigate. As a parent, it can be tricky to navigate through those challenges, because, like you said earlier, you don't want to helicopter, you don't want to make it too easy for them.
But you also need to kind of support difficulties.
Exactly. So that there's that kind of fine balance in between.
Oh, absolutely, And I think if you do have a kid that's struggling with a particular kind of challenge, with their mental health or being neurodivergent, then you often do need to kind of scaffold a little bit more than a teenager that's just your average teenager, although the kind of stats are pretty scary, with about 50% of Victorian teenagers needing mental health support in the last 12 months. So, it's
it is a bit scary.
A huge number of kind of young people who are struggling with their mental health. So, and I guess that was one of my big learnings as a parent is don't presume that kind of a grumpy teenager is just a phase, or that they've got a kind of really unpleasant personality, or that you're failing as a parent, because there's a reasonably high chance that they're struggling with their mental health. And
there's something underlying.
And for teenagers, depression often looks like a grumpy, irritable teenager. So that makes it extra tricky when they're not just kind of sad and saying, I'm depressed, mum. They're kind of going, naff off, and you're the worst parent in the world, and slam door. If that's a big change for them, you kind of go, what's going on? It can be a red flag. So,
what do you think from your perspective, Dr. Jo, I guess as a psychiatrist, with this massive rise in teenage mental health or young adult mental health? What's contributing to that, do you think, from your perspective?
Well, I think there's lots of things. Like before the COVID pandemic, kind of there'd been a decade where sort of young people's mental health had been deteriorating. So there was this sort of slow decline, and, lots of factors that are, a lot of them only slightly under our control, like climate change and social media, and so many different things than what we dealt with. I remember as a teenager, I think, does my crush like me was about my biggest kind of existential angst.
Exactly. It was a lot more simpler. We were talking about that last night, actually. Us growing up as teenagers was a lot more simpler. We didn't really have all these different layers and expectations I feel like the kids have now.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I feel, and that pressure. I mean, yes, we were kind of left to our own devices a lot more as well. So we were always responsible for, younger siblings if we had them.
So there was a lot of benign neglect going on.
There was.
So, bring back the benign neglect.
You know what? It actually served as a good purpose for us. We did become more confident, and we didn't care if we mucked up. I mucked up, fell over, I'll get up and off I go again. Whereas I feel like now the kids are a little bit more sensitive, and maybe partially it is us as parents as well, as you referred to earlier. We want to make it easier for them, and not for them to have the struggle. And maybe we're part of that that rise in mental health. I'm not sure, but I do really, really feel for the young kids growing up now. I feel like there's a lot more challenges ahead for them.
And I think particularly for young people in Victoria, the COVID pandemic and the prolonged lockdowns seem to have a really big impact. I went to the Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist conference in August last year, and they showed the kind of stats, and Victoria wasn't sort of coming back to where they were pre-pandemic in terms of really lagging behind the other states in Australia, which has been thought that probably being impacted by the pandemic more is at least one of those reasons, because they're missing so many of those really important, things that happen when you're at high school, like graduation 100%. And balls. Yeah, and I think especially for some kids who've sort of got anxiety and things, being at home actually their anxiety melted away because suddenly there was no pressure and didn't have to be out there in the world socially or doing challenging things. But then it made them almost kind of agoraphobic when it came to going back out into life, where suddenly you had to kind of go and talk to people in real life and show up in classrooms. And, so if you were an anxious kid, you kind of felt way better during lockdown and then way worse after lockdown because you didn't have that constant everyday exposure to the things that made you feel a bit anxious, but you did it anyway, and then you felt better about it. So I think a lot of kids had kind of setbacks in their mental health, but because it's such crucial times in their lives, those setbacks can actually kind of have longer term flow-on effects, because there's quite a lot of evidence that the more episodes of depression young people have, the more likely they are to have more. So if you get depressed as a 15-year-old, you kind of, and then have a few more episodes, then you might be struggling long term. Or if you've been a bit anxious and then kind of you get way more anxious after lockdown, then, you've got a lot more to deal with. So, psychologists are reporting like a 60% increase in referrals for young people with anxiety and depression, and that's a huge jump.
That's a huge jump. Massive.
So if any parents listening to this or watching this, if your kid's struggling, you're definitely not alone. There's a lot of it happening out there.
100%. On that, what are some, I guess, what should parents look out for if they, like you mentioned earlier, changes in a teenager that may not be synonymous with just the teenage years, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Just what are a couple of things that parents should look out for, and where you kind of go,
I think any big change in your kid, like for my son, for example, he was like ridiculously kind of positive and involved in everything and kind of ray of sunshine, and then literally overnight became kind of surly and negative and things, so that was a really big change. And even as a psychiatrist, I kind of missed that red flag, because my husband and I was like, is he finally kind of hitting the difficult teenage years, or is he but the fact that he then kind of popped back out of it a little while down the track, it wasn't his personality had changed or he was going to be stuck like that. It was more that he was going through a rough time. So it's kind of asking yourself, sort of noticing your teenagers, that if there's any really big change in their behaviour, and particularly a change in their functioning. If you've got a young person who, goes to school and plays sport and goes out with friends and then suddenly stops doing those things, that can be quite a red flag. Whereas if your teenager's just being really rude and irritable with you as parents and still going to school and go playing sport and kind of hanging out with friends, then probably it's just kind of your relationship going through that. Because teenagers are supposed to get kind of a bit tricky developmentally, so they go and breed somewhere else and don't stay in your house. It's adaptive for teenagers to, because you think in the wild, kind of the youngsters start fighting with the adults for kind of supremacy, and they usually get kind of sent out because they're not as strong, as powerful, and and then they go and kind of find breeding partners somewhere else. So that's kind of what humans are kind of designed to do, is to kind of individuate and separate. But we tend to have kind of young people living at home for much longer, so that's why we get quite a lot of challenge in our house through those kind of mid to late teenage years, where they ideally should be kind of setting up their own nest somewhere else, but they're in a very crowded nest and everyone's getting a bit tense. So,
being a young person trying to, fresh out of uni, trying to make it and trying to get that job, it's a challenging time.
My daughter's got quite a responsible job where she takes young people with intellectual disabilities on outdoor adventures and takes them away for weekends and things where she's in charge of them, and she gets paid $1 over minimum wage for that really responsible job, which isn't even a living wage.
I can't even process that.
Yeah, but I think one of the big challenges of kids boomerang home as young adults is trying to kind of readjust your relationship as kind of a adult to adult, because we have a pattern often of kind of that teenager parent relationship where you go, oh, what are you doing? What time are you going to be home? Da, 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 da. And then suddenly realising, she's kind of well into her 20s. She's a young adult now. I don't need to ask what time she'll be home.
I'm going to ask you a few fun, light-hearted questions. Yeah. Now, I know bribery is probably not a good tactic.
Yeah.
All right. But I have resorted to it on the odd occasion to get them to clean their rooms.
Yeah.
Do you have any bribery tactics that you used to use on your kids when they were teens?
Yeah, I think we had some sort of incentive program for exams. Of kind of like just kind of go do your best, have fun. But, if you happen to get this grade, there might be a wee extra bonus kind of. And so that was really motivating for my son because he's very kind of money focused. And so he'd go, yes, right, okay. So then if I get kind of excellence in these different kind of things, then I get this amount of money. And whereas my daughter was going, don't bribe me. I'm not like, so she's always been quite moralistic and very kind of ethically bound. Whereas my son, if there's a dollar sign in front of something, he'll be kind of right there. So,
there you go. So a little bit of bribery is okay.
Yeah. So I call it incentive program.
Program. I love that. Incentive program. Okay. Can you share tales where the worlds of young adult angst and humour collide in your practice?
So as a psychiatrist, I tend to be quite serious, like when I'm sort of seeing people. I mean, sometimes kind of a natural bit of kind of humour comes up in our conversation, and it's always a really good sign if we can kind of laugh together, but I don't kind of consciously kind of make jokes. But if I'm, say, seeing parents by themselves, then I'll tend to use humour a lot more so they feel very much like we're on the same page. Like I say, I've just graduated from parenting teens with a C+ average, so I'm kind of I mean, I personally think that I'm a solid B, but my teenagers
I'm going to give you an A. I'm going to give you an A.
Yeah, I think kind of occasional moments of an A. We haven't talked about any of the big fails, but anyway, and so I'll talk to them about, teenage brains being a bit like my 1962 VW Beetle that I had as a student that's all revving engine and dodgy brakes and gears. So I'll kind of use sort of humour to explain why kind of teenage brains aren't kind of wired yet. They're still kind of closed for renovations. And so that helps parents to kind of feel a little bit more understanding maybe of their kind of teenagers' angst, that, okay, their brains are still under construction. We have to be a little bit realistic. They're not kind of miniature adults. They're actually a work in progress. So I think using humour to explain that rather than going into a whole lot of neurobiology about the kind of the wiring of the frontal lobe with the kind of like revving engines, kind of dodgy brakes, dodgy gears, kind of
I can relate to that. I can relate to the revving engines and the dodgy brakes and gears.
Because there's this big kind of reward centre, so kind of, sex and drugs and rock and roll's really rewarding, and, huge emotions that they go from kind of happy to angry to sad, kind of all within about 30 seconds.
Yes.
And that's kind of the way their brains are wired. So I think if kind of parents understand that and use a bit of humour around that, then they can sometimes be more understanding that their teenagers are kind of not fully formed yet. And so if they go, kind of, you just go, not fully wired yet, rather than go, how can you be so disrespectful? Often one of the best ways to regulate a teenager is to validate what's going on for them, because if they go, you're so controlling, you can go, sounds like you're kind of finding me really controlling. And they go, yeah. So, you kind of validate rather than go, I'm not controlling, it's just because I care.
That's me.
Yeah.
I'm not controlling.
Yeah.
I'm not. I give a shit.
Yeah, it's kind of like, defensive kind of, and I tend to go into that mode myself too, in terms of where you're trying to sort of explain your actions and say that it's all coming from good intent and things like that, but all they're hearing is blah, 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 blah excuses.
There you go.
Yeah, whereas if you kind of go, hey, you're finding me controlling, they go, oh, finally she understands. And then they calm down a bit, and then you can kind of, connect a little bit, and then you can say, it's because I really worry about you, and then they can actually hear that and go, it's because Mum worries. That's her problem. But anyway, I'll humour her.
It's pretty much what goes on.
Texting her if she needs it because she's anxious. But if you go, it's because I can't, and all they hear is, then you're not going to have any meaningful connection. Calm the farm first. Kind of connect with them.
That's really good advice. Actually, calm the farm.
But it's also kind of trying to give your kids some kind of control around that. And I quite often do drop and run comments. So instead of like a TED talk about nutrition, like, in order for brains to function and therefore to have good mental health, you need to nourish your brain, blah, 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 blah. Whereas I just go, nuts are great brain food, throw a packet of nuts in front of them and walk away before they can argue anything. And like my son said, I was doing my uni exams. My flatmates were making fun of me because I was eating all the brain fuel. So I was having nuts and avocado and salmon. So he'd kind of taken on board this brain fuel idea.
Oh, that's good.
But it was through lots of little drop and run, like avocados, great brain fuel, walk away.
That's
kind of
good.
Salmon, the most awesome, ultimate kind of food you can eat. So he'd kind of just picked up those little seeds of ideas, and now he was kind of I need brain fuel for exams guy. So
that's good. That's a good strategy.
Yeah.
That's a good strategy.
Whereas I think if I'd done a kind of big monologue on it, he would have just gone glazed.
Which brings me to my next point, because you talk about as teenagers evolve and become young adults, that the home is more of a recharge station. If they were an electric car, they'd be plugging in, recharge, and then off they go back into the world. Explain that to me, or explain it to our audience, because I feel like that is such a great analogy to kind of look at how young teenagers are navigating through life as we know it today.
No, definitely. Because, as I was kind of writing the parenting chapter in my book, I was trying to think about how to explain kind of attachment relationships, and then as teenagers kind of start to individuate and go out into the world. And I was sort of at a stage where I was writing the book, and my kids were sort of coming back from uni holidays and things, and I was going, they're coming in and out. They're like recharging in the house, and then they're going back out into the world as confident young people. My role here is a recharging station, and how cool that they're coming back to recharge. So I kind of reframed, they're using the house as a hotel and they're just in and out doing their own thing, to kind of, they're actually doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing developmentally. And I did, as part of my psychiatry training, did a 2-year postgraduate diploma in infant mental health, which was all about kind of parent-infant, kind of 0 to 3 stage of life. And there was a lot about kind of attachment and attachment styles, and how a securely attached kind of toddler comes in and kind of recharges with their parent, and then kind of goes out and explores and goes and does some Lego and plays with Barbie dolls and says hi to little friends, and then they come back to the parents and they kind of come back and forth. And the anxiously attached kids either are kind of clinging to the parents' legs the whole time and don't do any exploring, or they're over kind of playing with Lego, pretending they don't need parents and not recharging at all, but actually equally anxious. So that kind of attachment style, so that kind of coming and going kind of is the ideal attachment sort of stage for a toddler. And then as kids get older, they spend more time out in the world, but they keep kind of coming back and recharging. And I was going, it's just like an electric electric car. They kind of come back in and kind of recharge. And so then I kind of did an analogy for the whole kind of parenting journey as kind of the relationship being kind of like a recharging garage, and kind of that when young people are struggling, you know, so if they're struggling with depression or anxiety or a relationship breakup or something, they might be plugged into the recharging station more than usual before they're ready to go out, and then they start kind of recharging at friends' places, and kind of their boyfriend or girlfriend's mum, it's like, oh no, they're recharging with her instead of me, but kind of going, oh well, it's fine. That's kind of...
You've got multiple stations.
Yeah, you can, you know, as a young person becomes an adult, they start recharging more in their kind of romantic relationship or with their best friend and things like that. And so to not be threatened by that, because that's developmentally normal to kind of start finding other recharging stations out there, and they might not come back to the kind of home garage quite as often. But if you keep the garage door open, then they are able to kind of come back when they want to. And also sort of really observing your teenagers, because sometimes they want to come and recharge, and sometimes it's just a look or a little comment of, and if we're really observant of our teenagers, then we can be kind of have the door open. If they're going, oh yeah, how was your day? Okay. And then you kind of go, oh, that okay was kind of perhaps a garage door open moment. You go, oh, okay. I'm just making a cup of tea. Do you want one? Or so that then you can kind of have the garage door open, whereas you go, oh, well, I had an awful day. You kind of miss that little window of opportunity. So it's often just a little look or a little comment where they're kind of going, I kind of want to recharge, you know, because a lot of teenagers won't really kind of go, right, Mum, I need some mum support time right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got to pick up the little cues. And certainly with my teenagers, they would sort of periodically kind of be in the mood to have a big chat about what was going on in their lives. And so that would be a drop everything moment, you know. So if I was kind of in the middle of the dinner, kind of dinner can wait, or if I was about to go and kind of go do some work emails or something, I'd go, oh no, well, I'm just going to actually sit and kind of chat, or stand in the kitchen and chat. Yeah. So it's kind of really making the most of those little moments, because if you kind of go, oh, we should talk about this later, then kind of later never happens, because that window of opportunities passed. And I know with my son it was quite often in the car. He used to kind of set quite a clear boundary. He said to me when he was 15, you can ask one question, one follow-up question, and anything more is annoying.
I love the honesty. One question, one follow-up question, anything more is annoying.
Yeah, so I'd be kind of driving to pick him up from school, because we lived in a rural area, so there was no public transport, so I had to do the school pickup until he got his licence. And I'd be thinking, oh, now what's my opening question going to be? What's a question that can't have a one-word answer? What might kind of, open doors to other things? But then I actually found that just kind of making a statement about my day and then kind of leaving a silence was actually more effective. I'd kind of go, oh, yeah, I took the dog to the vet for his vaccinations. And then he'd go, oh, so what's up with the dog? Or, oh, yeah, well, the science teacher was a real pain. Or kind of, didn't get into the football team, or so kind of doing a little kind of, I'm modelling, making a statement about my day, and then you kind of leave a pause and see whether they volunteer something. So sometimes kind of taking the pressure off with that kind of million questions type thing.
Tell us where people can find you in Melbourne to see your show, The Cool Mum.
Yes, my show, The Cool Mum, it opens on Monday the 8th of April, so next week. Yep. And it's on just for a 7-night season at Doubletree Hilton. And so tickets are on the Comedy Fest, Melbourne Comedy Fest website. And if there's any Edinburgh listeners, if your reach is out to there, tickets are going live tomorrow, I believe, for The Cool Mum at Edinburgh Fringe, and I'm going to be there for a whole month. And Cancer and Cartwheels is in the New Zealand Comedy Fest. So there's kind of lots happening at the moment. I've got a lot of balls in the air.